People often say that old photographs are like a closet full of skeletons. Behind every strange historical photo, there usually lies an unsolved mystery, a dramatic story, or a bold mystification. A single frame can convey much more than 1,000 words. The photos we're going to show you were found by various people, but each of them definitely contains something astonishing. You're watching Top Facts, and we're about to look at 20 vintage photos with a secret. If you're intrigued, let's dive in. This shot is recognized as the oldest photograph in history featuring human figures. However, at first glance, there's nothing unusual about it. A Parisian boulevard, building, and not a soul in sight. This frame was captured by photographer Louis Daguerre in 1838. And the twist here is that upon closer inspection, you can barely make out a man standing next to a shoe shiner. Due to long exposure times of cameras back then, it was impossible to capture moving objects in frame, and figures would blur into something shapeless. Most likely, getting your shoes shined to perfection required standing still for a long time, but even that wasn't enough to produce a clear image. Thus, we can appreciate the level of progress that photography technology has achieved today. In the midst of Bohemian Paris, right on Montmartre, at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, a place known as the Hell Cabaret emerged. In an era of shocking decadent entertainment, such decor was to many people's taste. At the entrance, guests were greeted by the menacing jaws of a devil with fiery red eyes and sharp teeth, while the cabaret's interior resembled the underworld. Dark, cave-like walls, flickering candles, and eerie props made of skeletons and demonic figures. It's interesting to think what the person who found these photos in a family album must have thought. Their relatives apparently had a taste for devilry, frequenting such establishments. This photo doesn't feature gnomes chopping down trees. These are ordinary people cutting down the oldest and tallest trees on Earth, the sequoias. In the mid-19th century, the logging of these colossal forests began using saws and manual axes. Sequoias can reach over 328 feet in height, and manually felling such a forest is a labor-intensive endeavor. Of course, mechanical machines were necessary if talking about such volumes of timber. The campaign to destroy a giant sequoia caused enormous damage to vast areas of untouched nature. Entire forests were cut down to meet the demand for lumber. What were they made into, one wonders? Chairs, matches, or bar counters? Nonetheless, these trees are something that we can never bring back. Imagine standing on a hill made of horned skulls. I do not see how guilty the bison hunters would have felt standing on it. In this photo, we see the catastrophic scale of the bison extermination in the 19th century. Their numbers had dwindled to a few hundred by the mid-1880s. Like elephants for their ivory, bisons were killed for their hides. When the hide was removed, the carcass was left to decompose in the open air, and the skulls were collected by local residents. Later, the bones were used in sugar refining, and the skulls were used to make fine bone china. Each bone was worth about $2.50 to $15 per ton, and that sounds heart-wrenching. Here are the real figures. When modern Europeans arrived in North America, there were about 50 million bison living there, freely migrating across the continent. But in the 1800s, their numbers plummeted to 540 individuals. The local residents realized that the animals were facing extinction and took it upon themselves to protect the existing herds to save the Native American species. The bison of the Plains Indians held significant cultural and economic importance, but their existence nearly came to an end. The efforts made to preserve the species and legislative ban on bison extermination helped to restore the population. In the early days of photography, capturing a family portrait was not as simple as saying cheese. Cameras at that time had long exposure times, and people had to remain still for 15 minutes or longer. One can only imagine what it took to photograph children, but Victorian women found a way to keep children still. They covered themselves with blankets or curtains and held the children in their laps. Just look at these photos and say that you wouldn't be frightened. Of course, it's good to know the backstory, but such a portrait looks quite strange. Why not just take a photo together with the children? The passion for photography progresses along with technology, each new era dictating its own styles and standards. But did you know that the invention of the camera in 1822, right up to the start of the 20th century, completely crazy methods of photography were practiced? During the reign of English Queen Victoria, the peculiar Victorian postmodern portraits emerged, featuring deceased family members. An unusual way to preserve the memory of a person, right? Nevertheless, families would gather for group portraits with the deceased. At that time, families faced high child mortality rates, and not wanting to come to terms with the tragic loss of infants or adolescents, parents kept them as if alive in these portraits. They look like ordinary photographs, considering what it took to pose them with those ancient cameras. What would you feel, knowing that one of the individuals in the photo is no longer breathing? I do not think anyone would ever want to revive the tradition of photographing the dead to pay the last tribute to life. This photo was taken during the pandemic of the Spanish flu, a time when the world was not only grappling with the plague of the First World War, but also a global pandemic that led to a healthcare crisis in all countries. The Spanish flu raged from 1918 to 1919 and was so named because Spain, a neutral country in the war, was the first to raise the issue of the global epidemic, drawing public attention to it. The unprecedented scale of infection infected approximately 1/3 of Earth's population, with the number of deceased estimated at about 100 million people worldwide. In this photo, a family is depicted during the danger of the virus spreading. Notice they're all wearing masks, including the cat. Even in those somber times, perhaps they found the strength to jest a bit. Two women with long hair in this photo will likely make you shiver slightly. They stand on the porch in floor-length dresses, and their loose hair almost falls to the ground. I have no doubt that they were beautiful and even amiable, but in this photo, they seem to be scheming something malevolent. The fact is that until the start of the 20th century, long hair in the Wild West was not a fashion statement, but a follow-up to religious and cultural traditions in some communities. As a sign of devotion or spiritual strength, both women and men grew their hair, not even trimming the ends. Not to mention that the fashion at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century was fundamentally different from modern trends. So there was no black magic or evil intent involved here. Ask your relatives about the hair length of your great-great-grandmothers. If you find Rapunzel-like braids among the family photos, share them with us in the comments. Halloween has significantly evolved over the years, and now instead of costumes, vampires, and witches, people dress up as superheroes or inanimate objects. How about a Lego builder costume or a traffic light dress? But if the essence of the festival is to scare the neighbors, then these guys from this 1930s photograph certainly succeeded to the maximum. I don't know about you, but if I met this group on a deserted road in the evening, I would run away as fast as possible. If you look closely, there's an ordinary elf in the middle. Then we have several pumpkins as masks, but truly nightmarish is the killer mouse. Nothing at all like Mickey Mouse. I suppose these people would still win the contest for scariest costume on Halloween today. Just imagine, the doorbell rings, you look through the peephole, and there they are. This optimistic photo looks more progressive than vintage. Elegant gentlemen have led a large-scale construction of a dam on the Colorado River. The piece of pipe on which the group of gentlemen stands is held by a crane at a height, but we do not know how far they are from the ground level. The grandeur of the Hoover Dam construction in the Black Canyon unfolded in the difficult times of the Great Depression, from 1931 to 1936. It was not an easy task, and the dam was a real engineering marvel. Here, innovative solutions were used, creative engineering coordinators worked, but the workers faced scorching heat, dangerous work, and poor working conditions. They were destined to change the course of the Colorado River. Yes, the dam became a wonder, but many lives were sacrificed for its completion. So these photo evidences are rather a cover of an obituary. In total, according to official data, 112 people died during the work, not necessarily manual laborers. On December 20th, 1922, before the construction began, surveyor J.G. Tinnery drowned while searching for a dam site. Then, there were several accidents and suicides of workers. Construction work was carried out at temperatures up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit in tunnels where people suffered from an excess of carbon monoxide. No wonder such conditions repeatedly led to fatalities. And the last death occurred on the same day, December 20th, in 1935, exactly 13 years after the first tragedy. Incredibly, the last victim was Patrick Tinnery, the son of the very surveyor who discovered this place. What do you think? Is the number of deaths a curse of the place? Or was the construction itself an overtask for that time? The Great Depression of the 30s was a challenging time in the United States. Unprecedented economic difficulties affected millions of people. Many American families were separated, lost their income and housing, and went hungry. Children often bear the brunt of the desperate situations because of their helplessness. In this photograph, we see a mother putting her children up for sale. 4 little ones sit under a sign, like merchandise in a store. Many families could not even provide for basic needs and came to such heart-wrenching decisions to draw the attention of the government and society. Surely when some are starving, others are drowning in luxury. The mother of these children, Lucille, received a little money for the photo's publication in the newspaper, and it did its job. After that, several people approached her with job offers and financial support, despite Lucille being pregnant with her 5th child. But what became of her children's fate? All 4 ended up in different families, and now we will briefly tell what came about it. The boy David was adopted by a good family that offered him a better life. He grew up to be a rebellious teenager who eventually ran away at home from 16 years old and ended up spending 20 years in military service. The girls, Ryan and Milton, whom the mother sold for $2, were less fortunate. The couple who adopted them were used as children workers. There wasn't much news about Lana, but she lived until 1988 and died of cancer. Karma is a Buddhist word, but in this case, it is applicable. Even if life has its price during a disaster, one still cannot buy another's fate. Remember the cartoon about the kid in Carlson? The kid asks his parents for a dog, and can you imagine a generation of children freed from gadgets for whom a dog could become a best friend and companion? This photo was taken seconds before the kid becomes the happy owner of a puppy. His life will now change forever. He might be ecstatically screaming and taking on the first responsibility for another being in his life. Or is he in the moment from meeting his best lifelong friend? This shot, taken moments after a joyous exclamation, could be the beginning of a great story. How will the fate of the puppy and the boy, whose life is probably much longer, unfold? If tears haven't welled up in your eyes just yet, just think about it. Or remember your childhood when you enjoyed pure pleasure, running and playing and exploring the world around you. We know the formula for the energy equivalent. Energy E equals mass M multiplied by the speed of light C squared. It was introduced to the world by Albert Einstein, and in this photo, he seems to have created his own equivalent. In this picture, the scientist stands with one of his friends. Interestingly, these two resemble a movie star with his stunt double. Albert Einstein's name is synonymous with genius and scientific talent worldwide, and his theory of relativity changed our understanding of space, time, and the universe. Perhaps if he hadn't been such a fan of smoking a pipe, he might have lived longer and maybe even made more discoveries. It's curious how many people can boast having a photo with the great physicist in their archive. This creepy costume is not a Spider-Man outfit, but merely the first model of bathing accessories. In the 20s and 30s, this vintage face swimsuit looks quite odd. The purpose of this tightly fitting face mask was to protect the eyes from chlorine in the pool and the skin from the sun's rays. Considering the puritanical modesty of the attire at the time, people were looking for innovative ways to enjoy the water safely. With such a mask, the hair remains dry, but the person wearing it looks like a reptile. I wouldn't dare get into the water with such attire. Someone might mistake me for a water monster and might have a heart attack. And while swimming at the beach, you might even get hit in the mask with a paddle. It looks strange, but the photo shows participants of a contest called Miss Lovely Eyes. Such entertainments were popular in the 30s and 40s, when charm was assessed only by the gaze, and the rest of the face was hidden under an ugly mask. We don't know how the judges chose the winner, but it's doubtful that modern girls would agree to wear such masks, even for prizes. In this picture, we see two children, unaware of their tragic fate. During the Second World War, the Nazis systematically persecuted, dehumanized, and killed millions of innocent people, primarily Jews. One of the darkest chapters in human history has left documentary materials and photographs. Just look at this photo and imagine having a younger brother or sister, a child, a nephew, or a niece walking hand in hand, and in just a few moments, they face cruel treatment or execution. These two in the photo are just two of the millions of innocent young lives lost among the many victims of the Holocaust. What needs to be shown every day for humanity to learn from this terrible time and prevent the reoccurrence of such atrocities. Next, we have a section from subscribers, and you love to send materials without any comments. It seems interesting to me for the reasons why girls of the last century posed like this at the Statue of Liberty. Was it acceptable at the time, or was it made using Photoshop? What do you think? And yes, if you have something else interesting in your archives, then send it to us at the email address listed in the description. This photo seems like an ordinary snapshot, where we see happy officers and their female colleagues relaxing, so necessary during wartime. However, the vintage picture is just the tip of the iceberg with a horrifying backstory. Let me ask you a question. How long would your conscience bother you if your actions resulted in the deaths of people, children, teenagers, women, men, and the elderly? They looked as if they worked in an office during the day. Their hands are clean, and they haven't done anything terrible. Nevertheless, these people, including the women, were employees of a concentration camp where countless Jews were subjected to violence, torture, and executions. During the Holocaust, Nazi Germany used a range of propaganda techniques to manipulate public opinion and justify their actions. It is possible that these people, men and women, did not consider Jews as humans and therefore simply did their job and relaxed on the weekends. Who and how should pray or propagate to ensure that such a period never occurs for humanity? Imagine you're driving through the American countryside, and somewhere in the state of Nevada, you come across abandoned townhouses and cars that have seen better days. Inside the houses, there is nothing but spoiled furniture and smiling mannequins. And from that moment, you start to shiver a little from horror. The photo from Doll City do not suggest a single soul ever lived here. The entire population of this eerie place consists only of mannequins, and there's a reason for this. In 1955, as part of Operation Q, the United States government built an entire simulated town in the Nevada desert to study the effects of nuclear explosions and their consequences for the survival of civilian infrastructure. The town was constructed for an experiment. Would anything remain of it after a nuclear bomb explosion? On May 5, 1955, the final test was conducted. An explosion with a yield of 29 kilotons shook the survival town, and these results were captured on photo and film. What a meticulous approach, you might say. Plastic babies were even laid in a crib and covered with a blanket. Did they really think that they would remain there after a nuclear bomb explosion? Unhealthy but filling food at fast food restaurants, which is so appealing, has its own historical advertising concept that not may seem so attractive to us. The yellow letters on a red background come from the original character, Ronald McDonald, the clown, in a striped yellow and red suit. However, in 2016, McDonald's decided to abandon him due to people with threatening intentions beginning to appear in various places and behaving antisocially. These antics destroyed the company's amiable image. If we look at footage from the 60s, we will see the original Ronald McDonald, and we will also agree that he does not look like a friendly clown. It's strange that such a monster advertises a children's restaurant, isn't it? In 1963, he was introduced as a marketing character for the McDonald's fast food chain and wore a hat resembling a tray, a cup on his nose, and an eccentric, not quite adequate suit. Frankly, his makeup and wig disturbed me, to say the least. The franchise was a novelty at the time, and the founders wanted to recreate a memorable character to attract children. Fortunately, over time, McDonald's realized that the mascot should be less frightening, and by 1967, the character transformed into a friendly clown that we know today. In the fire and chaos of war, sometimes things happen that outweigh everything else. In this photo, a soldier is nursing a tiny 2-week-old kitten. When the kitten grew up, Sergeant Frank Prater shared his rationed share of canned meat to save the cat's life. A touching story, isn't it? So, which story did you find the most engaging? What touched you and what repelled you? If you also have vintage photos in your archive, don't hesitate to share them or write to us in the comments below. Our other interesting collections have already appeared on the screen, and you can continue watching right now.